Okay. So we'll recap. There was, we're just trying to adopt the agenda. There was no additional motions, or there were no additions. So just call the vote on adopting the agenda as presented and just waiting for you. So if you just want to use the voting buttons on Zoom, that'd be great. And that carries unanimously. Sorry about that, Councillor.
No worries.
We have no people registered for the open forum that I'm aware of this evening. And which brings us to the consent agenda. We have 3 items. A move that we adopt as presented, adopt the minutes of the regular council meeting September 22nd, adopt the special council meeting minutes of September 29th, 2020, and adopt the special committee of the whole meeting minutes October 6th, 2020. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor? And that carries unanimously. Brings us to item 6, public hearings. There are none. We have no registered presentations for item 7, which brings us to business item 8A, City of Edmonton and City of Beaumont Intermunicipal Collaboration Framework. Mr. Wong.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I'm here to present you with the City of Edmonton, City of Beaumont Intermunicipal Collaboration Framework for approval. The Intermunicipal Collaboration Framework was presented to the committee meeting on September the 15th. For discussions, the committee recommended to present the ICF to council for approval tonight. As a result of the Bill 25 Red Tape Reduction Implementation Act, ICF for members of the Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board is no longer a requirement. However, continued discussion with the City of Edmonton recognize a considerable value to promote and to facilitate recreation services more strategically and efficiently. The ICF does not commit Beaumont into any cost-sharing commitment. It just commits the 2 municipalities to share information and connect with one another and seek collaboration partnership in the future. For your information, City of Edmonton presented the ICF to the Intermunicipal and Regional Development Committee for approval to take it to City Council just last Friday on October the 9th. I checked their website. Their next City Council would be next Monday, October the 19th. I believe it is due to the holiday yesterday. So they will get the ICF approved at the next council meeting. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have on the ICF with the City of Edmonton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wong. This is a great body of work that's taken a great deal of time and effort by both our administrations and council members to get across the finish line. It's a great day for Beaumont and the City of Edmonton, as it clearly outlines how we're going to work together and start to collaborate on recreation projects as they benefit both of our communities, or as they're seen to benefit both of our communities. So really, really happy today to see this here for our final vote. Open it up to members of council for questions. Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Wong, for the great report. I support this wholeheartedly. I have to say that the most interesting page in the document for me was Schedule F, where it comes to possible next steps. And I'm just wondering if, for the interest of the curious among us, you could give us an example of what a next step might be. Any one of those.
Oh, any of the oh, sorry. I heard somebody is talking, so sorry about that.
All right, don't worry about it. Keep going.
So I believe that the next step on any of the items listed on Schedule F, those are the area for future discussions And any parties, the City of Edmonton or the City of Beaumont, if there is a need to discuss any of those items or even put additional items onto the list for future discussion. So basically, the first step will be either city would bring it to the, there is a working group to bring it to the working group for discussion. And if the, for example, if City of Edmonton raise up, let's say the Valley Sioux for discussions, and the City of Edmonton, City of Beaumont at that working group is saying, no, we don't want to discuss that at that moment. So the conversation basically ends there until later on the subject matter is brought up again. And the two parties are interested in the further discussion on how we can collaborate on, for example, the Valley Sioux recreation services, then the conversation will continue at that point of time. So it will basically, like I said, the ICF commits the two municipalities to continue to discuss and strategically talk about future collaboration.
Could I just follow up on that?
Sure.
Mr. Wong, would an example of that be then regarding capital improvements, or could it also be about charging fees back and forth?
If I may, the ICF does not commit to any specific elements that will be subject for the discussion at the time that it is brought up.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Stoute.
Thank you, Worship. So I'm right in assuming, through your Worship to Mr. Wong, I'm right in assuming then that this, that one of the objectives of this is that we can identify new opportunities for intermunicipal cooperation between Edmonton and.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Supplemental.
Follow-up.
So would that include, for instance, I'm a little bit off the top of my head here, but this has been discussed by council before. For instance, would that include something like a trail connection between Township 505 and Ellerslie Road, which would obviously have to be a joint project between the two municipalities? Example of something that could be brought forward into this framework, using this framework.
I believe for the trails development, it may not necessarily fall under the ICF, because there is a definition on recreation services as listed on section 1 there, the definition. So basically, the trails may not necessarily be aligned with the definitions within this ICF, but there are other mechanisms to work with City of Edmonton on the trail connections and how to collaborate for the development of those trails.
So I'm sorry if I understood you correctly, then a trail network would not be included in this framework. A trail connection.
It would be the recreation facilities as listed mostly on Schedule A. Those are the inventories, right? Yeah. So
those are all facilities, pools, parks, leisure centres, etc. There's not a trail listed there, as far as I can tell. I did search for trails and it's not finding any.
But having said that, if the City of Beaumont wants to include trails as part of the recreation services, we may work through the working group later on as we work together. And basically, it is similar to my previous answer. This is the collaborative efforts for the discussion between the two municipalities there.
Okay, thank you. So trail, we could decide that we wanted to add trails and go into that discussion with Edmonton as part of this framework.
Yep, could be. We just add it to the definitions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, thank you. I would just say that we had this item up for discussion already at Committee of the Whole, and I don't know that concern was brought up. So we're at the point now where the final document's in front of us. So I don't know how pressing it is to make changes at this time. I don't think it is. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prepared to move the motion to adopt the ICF?
So moved, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, hang on. There we go. Seeing none, all in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much, members of council and city administration. That was like I say, that's a great piece of work. It's a great day for us.
Thank you very much.
Brings us to item 8B, election signage regulations.
All right, good evening, Your Worship and Council. I'll just be sharing my screen with a presentation to support the report that we're bringing forward. So that should be visible now. And I'm assuming I'm coming through clearly.
Yes, we have you.
Excellent. All right. So administration will present its findings and recommendations for the election signage regulations. And then at the end of this presentation, we'll open to questions of administration from council. And so this presentation is focused on bringing forward the recommendation that council direct administration to make the recommended changes cited within this report to regulate election signage by using the appropriate enforcement mechanisms and bylaws to be adopted by council prior to January 1st, 2021. So to provide some context, at this point in time, election signage regulations are primarily regulated within the land use bylaw. And so although this bylaw was updated in 2019 on a pretty holistic basis, the regulations focused on election signage by regulations have been in place since 1997 and were just transferred from the previous bylaw to this bylaw. And so these regulations have been in place since 1997. However, we do recognize that election periods mark a temporary departure from the normal types and the amounts of signage that we see in the community. So we've developed some recommendations to ameliorate concerns that may arise due to this sort of temporary departure from the normal sort of types and amounts of signage present within the community. And so in doing this, we are focused on three concerns, three purposes here: on safety, to ensure that sight lines and traffic can safely navigate the transportation system. We're focused on providing a clear process and standardization for those who are putting up signs. And then we're also trying to limit aesthetic impacts to the community, avoiding visual noise and those sorts of components that may arise or be perceived to arise during municipal election periods or any election periods for that purpose. And so the research that was undertaken for this was a legislative review, which found that there were not any significant sort of directions or impediments on how we would be attempting to regulate election signage going forward based on these recommendations. Then we also reviewed provincial regulations, which focused on provincial highways that can be incorporated and followed through the recommended approach. And then we completed a scan of municipalities to see what their approach would be to inform our own decisions going forward. And so we looked at 9 municipalities in total, some in the region and some across Canada. And so we found a couple of different approaches. Some municipalities will have an entire signage bylaw that will regulate all forms of signage. Smaller municipalities like the city of Beaumont regulate signage within the land use bylaw primarily. And then the city of Edmonton option, which is the recommended approach, would have election signage regulations being present in a few different bylaws to ensure it's being enforced in the correct approaches. However, these are then pulled out into a set of guidelines that are easily conveyed to candidates and that candidates can agree to follow going forward. And so that would be our recommended approach. And then the actual things that we were hoping to regulate fall into these sort of categories to ensure that we're achieving those three purposes of safety, standardization, and limiting aesthetic impacts. And so this includes timelines for removal, placement requirements, clearer definitions, distance requirements, and prohibiting certain forms of signage. And so these were all the different areas that other municipalities were regulating. And we, administration has identified that based on our current regulations and what we are hoping to achieve, there are just a few of these that we need to focus in on. And so this would include timelines for removal. This actually expands the amount of time that signage would be up for after the election. However, this would be in alignment with other jurisdictions in the area and would just ensure some coherence based on what people may be hearing from neighbors. Altering this from 48 hours to 72 hours. This would give candidates more time to clear election signage after the election period is over. So that would be shifting from 2 days to 3 days, basically. Now we shift into requirements that would more substantially impact how election signage can be placed. And so the regulations focusing on placement requirements, we are able to prohibit signage being placed in specific locations. This would include school zones and playground zones. That would be coming from sort of a safety perspective to ensure that in these areas where we may see more pedestrian traffic, more traffic at certain times of the day, that election signage does not overpopulate or become a distraction in those areas. And then additionally, making it explicitly clear that signage cannot be present on roadway medians would be a way to ensure safety through limiting impediments to sight lines while in transit or moving. And so this would also provide clear process for everyone. This can be very easily visually displayed on a map of where signs can and cannot be placed, and then would also fit the purpose of reducing visual clutter. Other municipalities also regulate distance requirements, and so this is somewhere that the city of Beaumont does not currently regulate, but can regulate if these recommended changes are moved forward on. We have identified 15 or 1.5 meters as a clear basis of separation in a couple of different scenarios. Requiring 15 meters from basically any intersection, crosswalk, and fire hydrant. This again is to ensure safety, reduce visual cluttering, provide a clear process. Also requiring 1.5 meters from the edge of the curb of a roadway for similar reasons. And then finally requiring 15 meters separation between two signs of a single candidate. So these all require that signs not be placed in these areas or must meet these thresholds, basically, and can be pretty easily conveyed again through the guidelines that would be developed after amending the appropriate bylaws to enforce these mechanisms. And then the final piece, we did identify that some municipalities provide a distinct definition for election signage. Currently, what we are operating on within the city of Beaumont, we identified as strong enough, and we could maintain the current maximum of 0.6 meters squared. This would, we don't feel we have to go beyond this in any ways. 0.6 meters squared is pretty stringent as is, and still allows candidates to be placing signage out in the community that is visible and allows them to participate in the election, but also would ensure that we don't see strange forms of signage that usually need to be larger in scope. So we can basically work with the definition that we have right now. So looking at next steps based on the recommendation that administration has brought forward, what administration would plan to do if council provides direction for would be to develop the set of amendments to impacted bylaws, which could include the land use bylaw, the traffic safety bylaw, etc. And then based on these amendments being created and passed, we would be able to create a set of guidelines for candidates to follow for the 2021 municipal election. And this would be the process that we would work through if council provides direction for this. And so this would conclude the presentation from administration, and we'll welcome any questions from council at this point.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all the work that's gone into this. Just looking at the RFD, there's 5 recommendations in front of us tonight. So my plan here is to open it up for general questions to members of council. And depending on how that goes, we'll either go one by one and work our way through, or we'll see what council's thoughts are. So right now, looking for questions for administration, and then some thoughts from members of council on how to proceed. Questions for administration from members of council. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, thank you. Just a general question, I guess, around the thoughts about how this would be communicated, and no matter what we decide tonight, how it would be communicated, and what kind of tools we're going to be putting together for residents and prospective candidates to use in order to navigate whatever we decide. It feels like there's a bunch of stipulations here that folks will need to work their way through, and I know there are currently, but what is administration thinking in that regard? Thank you.
Mr. Rates.
Yes, so I can provide an initial response based on correspondence that I've been able to complete through developing this RFD, but if there are other members of administration who have more to add on top of what I say, I totally am open to that. But through your worship, to the councillor, we had identified that creating this set of guidelines that place all of the regulations that are to be followed visually in clear, plain language in a simple document would be the main approach to communicating this to the candidates at the start of 2021. And the intent would be that over 2021 leading up to the actual election period, as nominations come in, these guidelines are reinforced, sent back out, made sure that they're clear to candidates as they onboard basically through the nomination process. And then through the community, this document would become available to the community as well, so that it's clear from the public's perspective what the requirements are. So yes, I see that Mr. G has come online too, so if she has more to add.
Mr. RG.
Thank you, Worship, through to council. I think Mr. Rates has actually communicated it quite well. The intention is to put it into the set of guidelines that would be put onto the Beaumont election webpage, and then also into the candidate packages. That information can also be advertised in the local paper for the general public to be aware of, and again, for posted on our website for the general public.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yeah, please. Yeah, that's good, I think. I think that some other helpful things might be, some pictorials or even a map of the community that, shows red along the places that you can't put a sign. At the end of the day, municipal enforcement is going to need a tool as much as candidates are going to need a tool, and something to refer to and something to educate with. So whatever we decide tonight, those might be a couple of suggestions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Moncalswain.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. When we initially had this conversation, there were kind of 2 different ideas being banded around. One was kind of what you're presenting to us, kind of limiting the distance between signs, etc. And then there was another that was more, what I felt was a lot simpler, in the sense of just limiting the total number of signs and leaving it at that. Just curious if administration looked at that other option. I think you gave a good explanation as to why you're looking at this one, but just curious on the second option, why you chose not to recommend limiting the number of signs to just a certain number and avoiding the other guidelines that are needed to go with that.
So yes, through your worship to council, For this piece, based on the research that we had completed for what was visible in other municipalities, we did not identify an example of that sort of approach to regulation. And so we could not really be sure of that approach's success. And we could be sure through looking at these different approaches of the success of these sorts of methods to regulation. So that's why we moved forward with this piece. So hopefully that presents some clarity there.
Yeah, it answers the question for sure. I think I may disagree with it, but I'll save that for when we get into discussion. But appreciate your answer. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further requests to speak, I guess I'll make the motion that council direct administration to make the recommended changes to regulate election signage by using an appropriate enforcement mechanism, i.e. the existing land use bylaw, election signage bylaw, et cetera, to be adopted by council prior to January 1st, 2021. Open it up to discussion and debate. Councilor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Wright. Question about when we would first see a draft of the changes, or would it come back to us when it's ready to go? Is council going to see the proposed amendments to the different bylaws?
Mr. Rates or Ms. Dargy?
Within the recommendation, we identified that this would be prior to January 2021, and that the intention would be to bring forward the draft regulations completely that would move forward on all these specific regulations. So we would be ready to present these and move forward with those amendments within the same council meeting. But I'll defer to Ms. Dargy just to clarify.
So just to add to that, the changes that are required, so should council decide that changes are required to implement some of these regulations, we noted in our review that there were some existing bylaws that needed to be updated and could be incorporated, this information could be incorporated into, so it doesn't need to be a separate bylaw, and that those guidelines could be established based on the direction that council provides tonight.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm just a bit confused on how many different bylaws we would be looking at then. Would they be all coming back to council for amendment?
Thank
Ms.
you.
Dargy?
Sorry, thank you, through to council. So there are two bylaws right now that would need to be updated. The traffic safety bylaw and the land use bylaw would need to be revised. They would be more general statements as to where election signage or that election signage could be posted in accordance with the guidelines. And the guidelines would be developed very similar to the City of Edmonton process and method. And those guidelines could be drafted prior to the end of the year. In discussing with legislative services the timing of this, it is important to get these guidelines drafted so that candidates are aware of what these regulations would be. One thing to note is that these regulations would not apply just to municipal elections, but they would apply to federal and provincial elections as well.
Interesting thought.
It just, if I could.
Follow up? Yeah.
Just, I guess what I'm trying to get my head around is whether there would be any public consultation at all, or the bylaws would be open to any public hearing or public scrutiny, or would it come back as the decision is being made tonight and this is the decision?
Ms. Dargy?
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Barnhart. So if council were to make recommendations on the changes that, or provide direction on the changes that they wanted to implement, there would be, the land use bylaw would come back to council, and as it is required in the MGA, there is a public hearing required to change the land use bylaw. There is no public hearing required for the traffic safety bylaw and the set of guidelines. In order to meet the time frame to make these changes before the end of the year, it would be very difficult to provide full comprehensive public engagement.
Thank you.
Ms. Dargy, I see your hand was up. Did you have another matter?
Thank you, Your Worship. That was just the previous question that Mr. Rates had answered. I had just wanted to add that these regulations don't just apply to municipal elections, but to provincial and federal elections. And that's why we took an approach that was similar to other communities in their surrounding areas, so that candidates on the provincial front and the federal front wouldn't have to look to too many different regulations, and in different municipalities have different regulations. We were very similar then to the surrounding areas, and it would be easier for those provincial and federal candidates to be consistent and comply with all of the regulations.
No, thank you, appreciate that. Councillor Moncal Swain, followed by Councillor Danlock.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. And I was going to point out the provincial federal piece as well. So glad that was brought up. While I understand trying to provide a bit of simplicity on those elections, I think if we have a bylaw that just limited the number, I think you just know, okay, in the city of Edmonton, I can only use X amount of signs. So just generally, I think what we're trying to achieve here is the report kind of more focuses on safety versus the quote unquote the nuisance factor that we all heard during the campaign. And I don't think that the recommended proposal provides is going to address that. Yes, you're not going to have someone place 3 signs in a row, but still every 15 meters, that we still could have a litany of signs across the city. So, I don't support what's in front of us. I think we do need to go to a number. I think we could kind of adjust that as it related to municipal versus provincial versus federal. Obviously, less candidates at the provincial and federal level. But ultimately, what we're trying to achieve, what I thought this discussion was to limit the number of signs to reduce the clutter. And I don't think what's being put in front of us is there. And the argument that no other municipality has done this doesn't hold much weight with me. So I think from a safety perspective, I agree with the recommendation to keep the same square footage, I guess, because that limits the size of them. So I think ultimately, if we're trying to follow through on some of the concerns that were identified, I would be more in favor of limiting it to a certain number of signs on public property, and obviously on private property. You can if you get 100 people to put signs on their lawns, then go at it. But on public property, I'd limit the number. So those are just my opening comments and just thoughts from other council members on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Definitely some things to think about. Councillor Danlock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Based on previous discussions as well, I also am leaning in favoring a number of signs for each candidate to have, whether they be a mayoral candidate or a council candidate. I do believe our discussion recently revolved around public concern. It's mentioned in the report several times, the visual clutter. I think the number of signs addresses visual clutter. For example, the 4th point, separation distances between signs. I'm okay with having that suggestion of 15 meters. If you're also to put on a sign restriction such as 50 or 75 signs, I only said 50 because we had 20 candidates last time for council members. So 20 candidates at 50 signs each, that's 1,000 signs right there. That's a lot of signs for a municipality of our size. So I'm okay with the separation idea in point number 4, but I would favor myself personally a cap on the number of signs candidates can actually put in a municipality during the election. Point of order, if I may, Mr. Chairman, on that point.
Sure.
Were you planning on going through each of these 5 points specifically?
No,
or as a whole?
The current motion is all 5 of them are on as a whole. So.
Okay, that's what I thought you did. Okay, so I'll speak then, if I could, to the first point, the number of hours taking a sign down after the election. Also to the point of visual clutter from our citizens who said they were tired of seeing signs and submitting signs. I'm fine with the 48 hours as they're currently. I had my signs down that night, but that's just my choice. Most candidates had them down, I thought, very quickly within 24 hours. Most candidates, there were very few beyond 2 days. I think leaving it at 48 hours is okay. If it's vote was 72, I'm okay with it, but I think 48 is fine the way it is because most candidates, I believe, were well within 48 hours, had all their signs down, if I recollect properly 3 years ago. So my only comment on the first point is I'm okay with 48 unless council feels strongly more time is required for candidates. Thank you.
Councillor Newkirk.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, for myself, there was a bunch of stuff in the report that I hadn't thought about as thoroughly, I would say. Specifically around the school zones, playground zones, roadway medians. I think those are good things to think about. The 15 meters back from an intersection, when I close my eyes and think about where a whole bunch of the signage is, candidates had focused at four-way stops. And at four-way stops, you should be focused on other vehicles and pedestrians rather than signage, right? So I think that those couple of safety pieces do deserve consideration. The distance requirements, 1.5 meters from the edge of a roadway or curb. I think that I can't recall, but if we didn't specify that before, that's probably a good measurement to have. And the 15 meters between signs seems okay. I think I'd be on the same path as Councillor Daniluk, that the 48 hours I think was sufficient. If council wished to move it to 72, I don't think that's a real sticking point for myself, but the 48 hours may be okay. But for myself too, looking back at, what problem was I trying to solve in my head when this discussion was coming forward, and it came down to the nuisance factor as well and number of signs. So myself, it does feel like there's a bullet point missing here alongside these ones that are proposed that says X number of signs on public property. I would support unlimited on private property if if a candidate hustles and gets out there and gets more signs, then great. But I think for myself, in summary, the 48 or 72, I would probably favor 48, but 72 would be okay. I don't see any reason not to take the other bullet points into consideration, but I would ask that we consider adding a bullet point with a number of signs. So that's my thoughts.
Okay. All right. So seeing no further requests to speak, I'm just going to throw a couple of points on this. I'm pretty happy with the 5 recommendations as laid out. They were, I think they will solve the problems that we were trying to address. And they do it. For me, the 48 hours versus 72, I'm with Councillor Van Newkirk. It's 2 days, 3 days. If it helps us align with provincial regulations in our neighboring municipalities so everybody knows what they are, I'm okay with an extra day. Most candidates, like myself and others, will probably get them down within 24. Most are all gone by 48. So I don't think that's going to hurt us. I do hear 3 councillors advocating for a number. I don't want to get it bogged down in these 5. So we will not amend this one, but I will put it out to one of those 3 to throw out a separate motion if they want to debate that particular item. And then we can put a second motion for a cap on number of signs on public and private property. So seeing no further requests to speak, I'm going to call the question on the motion before us. All those in favor?
Sorry, John, sorry, Your Worship. Can you just explain the process that you're going through here? You want us to vote on the motion that's on the floor, but if we want to look at adding a sign restriction limit, you want us to go through an additional motion on top of that. So right now we're just voting on what we see in front of us.
Yeah, we're just voting on the 5 in front of us, and then we'll put a second motion on the floor to debate the cap.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Stout, Councillor Daniluk? And so those 5 recommendations passed unanimously. And for a cap, is there a member of council prepared to move a motion on capping the number of election signs in the city of Beaumont? Councillor Van Newkirk, hang on.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I would motion that council consider a maximum of 50 signs on public property placed as per the limits in the last motion. I think that'll get discussion started off. I look forward to hearing thoughts of other councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Discussion on the motion, Councillor Stout.
Thank you, Worship. I'm opposed to putting a cap and a numerical value on the top of this. That won't come as a surprise, as I think we already discussed this. I think it's unnecessary. I think that the issue of unsightly signage is already addressed in in the bylaw as proposed, primarily by the separation distance. I think it's arbitrary in that whatever value you decide is the correct number of signs, by the way, I think 50 is much too low, it's arbitrary because whatever value you assign it, there'll be some candidates who think that's way too low and some candidates who think it's too high. You'll never arrive at a satisfactory value that satisfies everybody, I don't believe. I also think it's unfair. Some candidates rely a lot more on their signage and getting their message out through their name and through use of signage, and others rely on other methods, and that's as it should be. People are free to choose what their method is. I think this is an unnecessary restriction that doesn't really address a problem that we need to solve because we've already addressed it. So I won't support a cap, no.
Thank you very much. Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just have another question, and this is a practical one. If it came down to having a cap of 50, how would that be enforced? Would someone have to count them on a daily basis between the beginning of the period, September till October 16? How would that happen? Somebody?
Mr. Race, CEO?
Yeah.
Somebody want to?
So through your worship to Councillor Barnhart, I can take the first stab at it, but then if we have additional perspectives from within administration, I'd welcome people adding their thoughts. But I think one main reason.
Stab at it.
Pardon?
We're going to let the CAO take a stab at it.
No, let Stephen go ahead.
Let him go? Okay.
He's done the research.
Okay,
No, go ahead.
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, I didn't see you on the screen, but I see you're in the room. So sorry about that. But I'll just add a couple thoughts first, and then I'll let you follow up. But I think we didn't see this within the research that we examined because it would be difficult to enforce from a practicality perspective. There's no way, it would take quite a bit of time to circulate throughout the community and tally up how many signs are out there. And so this is why we don't see other municipalities moving in this direction. But now I'll defer to the CAO. I just wanted to highlight the research that had been done behind this and why it had sort of pointed in this direction.
I've got nothing. That's exactly what was going to come out of my mouth, Stephen. I'm suspecting that's why others haven't adopted this one, because the ability to enforce it is pretty difficult. If you were going to go that route, and depending on whether you're going to go a bylaw or whether you're going to go a declaration, the signing the declaration is probably the closest thing we could have to relying on enforcement through the honor system. But no, that you nailed it, Stephen. Thank you.
Just for that reason, Your Worship, I will not be supporting the cap on it.
Fair enough. Councillor Danlock, followed by Councillor Hendricks, followed by Councillor Moncoswain.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do favor limit of signs from a visual clutter perspective, but Councillor Barnhart's point is a very good one in terms of enforcement. Every bylaw we do as a council needs to be enforced, or else it has no purpose. I get that. But I would be very concerned to, in a sense, if the bylaw were to pass, or the motion to pass at 50 was the cap, I'd be very much against having any administration spend any time trying to enforce it. I think the honor system would be important. We all know the number's 50. Those who run in the next election know what's going to be 50 signs. If they choose to put 75 out, people will notice that. They'll draw their own conclusions on that candidate's honor in terms of the bylaw and the intent of it. I don't want to have administration waste time counting signs. I think the honor system should be enforced. I do like the idea of 50 with the 5 points we already passed. I'll vote for the 50 when it comes up to voting purpose, but if it doesn't get enforced, I'm okay with that. But I do think your point's taken, Councillor Barnhart, on enforcement, but I think the honor system would be, I think, a good test of the candidates in question. Thank you.
Councillor Hendricks, followed by Councillor Moncoswain.
Your Worship, question to administration then. Say we capped it at 50 and say somebody decided that 50 wasn't going to cut it, so they put 200 up, and that person gets elected. They're in contravention of the bylaw. Is there a chance that seat would become unseated as a result of not fulfilling the obligations under the bylaw?
Ms. Winter?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Hendricks. It would be dependent on the enforcement that you put within the bylaw on what would happen to that prospective candidate who won the election, on what the actual enforcement piece would be.
Thank you. Councillor Montgoswain.
Thank you. I think as it relates to enforcement, the same thing applies to, the 15 meters apart, 1.5 meters away from the sidewalk, etc. We're still going to have, if people want to make complaints, we're going to have bylaw people go out there with a measuring tape and measure between signs. And the same question pops up whether that person was in contravention if they had a sign within 12 meters of each other. So I don't think, while it does add a little bit more, I don't think that should be a reason why people vote against it. I would defer back to the CAO's comments where it was more of a declaration versus a bylaw, then I think that leads to Councillor Danilak's point around the honour system. It takes out bylaw enforcement on it, yes, it probably has less teeth, but in order to try and get the fourth vote here, I think maybe a declaration as when they sign up, it could be a way to go. I won't go back into my reasons about why we should limit the number of signs, but I just don't want people to think that bylaw officers out there counting signs is the only thing they're going to be doing. There are plenty of other restrictions in here that bylaw, if people complain, are going to be impacted. So I'm supportive of this motion, but I think if we needed to nudge it a little bit, maybe it's more of a declaration than a bylaw.
Councillor Hendricks.
Your Worship, then back to administration declarations. Declarations are taken by the returning officer at the time when nominations are applied, and at that time, Beaumont has had its experience with declarations. I think this term's had its experience with declarations. They are enforceable. They are important. They can find themselves in the way of legal issues. But I'd like to get somebody to expand on a declaration versus a bylaw.
Ms. Winter? CEO?
We look at the refer back to the report, and administration is recommending that we make amendments to all those impacted bylaws and pull the signage stuff out of them and refer to a set of guidelines, which we could then get a declaration signed. If we put something in a bylaw, as you know, and we get a complaint, we've got to enforce it. That bylaw needs to include what that enforcement is, whether it's a fine or what have you, whatever council decides. If we put it as a guideline and have them sign a declaration, then it goes back to the honor system that we talked about before. So that's the recommendation that we're making.
Follow up, Councillor Hendricks.
Just want to take that thread one step further. If there is a declaration, and the declaration was I had 50, when in fact I had 200, where do we go next?
Yeah, I would have to consult with legal to find out how to uphold that. Sorry, I missed that part of your question. Unless Ms. Winter wanted to add anything.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Hendricks. I think I understand your lining of questioning with regards to the declarations that you're taking, with regards to your oath when you're bringing in your nomination papers. Those are laid out within the Municipal Government Act, where this type of declaration is through the City of Beaumont. So those are two separate declarations that are being enforced, one through the Municipal Government Act and one through the City of Beaumont. I agree with Mr. Schwartz that we would definitely want to contact legal to see where we go with that, but this type of declaration would not be running through the Municipal Government Act.
Okay. Councillor Van Newkirk, followed by Councillor Stout.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to respond to good discussion. Thank you, everyone. Just wanted to respond to, I guess, some of the comments. And the first one would be around the number of signs. I proposed 50 as somewhere to start. When I try to think about how we will know we got it right or got the number right, I don't know that you're going to know, we'll ever know if we got it right or not. we're elected to make decisions and you got to start somewhere. So, so 50 is how I approach that. If I would be open to friendly amendments from councillors if they thought that number should be amended. So, and then secondary to just also to speak to enforcement, very similar to what Councillor Malkoff-Swain said, with what's in front of us and with what was just passed, we've already inherently created a situation where administration and enforcement are going to be out with tape measures and measuring distances, and for the right reasons. I think when a complaint is put in, then you have to look into it. So I don't think that for that period of time that it would be that much of an increased enforcement item to start counting signs. However, I could be wrong. This is something that, should we make a decision here tonight, well, I think it would need to be revisited to see if the intent was accomplished. And I go back to the problem that we are trying to solve, which is the nuisance factor, which was so many, just a plethora of signs everywhere, all over the municipality. And we heard loud and clear from the election that, or I did anyways, that residents thought that needed to change and wanted to see something different. So for myself, this is me trying to do something different. This is me trying to put forward a limit on the number of signs. And I think that, if you didn't support the motion tonight, I think you might be, in a position where you wish you would have in the future. And if that happened, then, then we bring the discussion back to council. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Councillor Stout.
Thank you, Worship. Just quickly, a couple of things that occur to me regarding this is that, yes, I really don't want to task administration not only with measuring the distances between signs, which is a fairly simple operation, but also counting the number of signs through the municipality, throughout the municipality, and also while they're doing that, distinguishing between the ones that are on public property and the ones that are on private property. And also remember as well that this applies to not only to municipal elections, but also to federal and provincial ones, if I understand correctly. Or is the declaration going to be specifically only for municipal elections? I don't know. As well as that, as regards the number for the cap, I am aware from conversation with one candidate at the last election who put out at least 200 signs. Now, some of those may be on public land, may be on private land as well as on public, but I'm going to suggest to you that 50 might be a lot lower number than some candidates would want to put out.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dargy, I see your hand raised. Did you want to weigh in here?
Thank you, Worship, through to Council. I just wanted to add that through this process, we also consulted with municipal enforcement on whether or not it would be reasonable to enforce a distance or a number of signs. Their recommendation came back with a distance between signs. They did feel that it was too onerous or would be difficult to enforce the number of signs given the size of our municipality. Beaumont's not large in comparison to, say, the city of Edmonton, but there are a number of there's a lot of roadways, there's a lot of places to be looking and to be counting signs. With respect to enforcing the distance, that can be done through a simple, it's about 2 car lengths between signs. So that's an easy visual for them. I don't expect that you will see them out there with an actual tape measure unless there is some dispute, but just from a practical perspective, the ability to enforce the distance versus the number of signs.
Thank you very much. All right, Councillor Hendricks, to wrap it up.
Thank you, and it just want to make sure that when we talk numbers, I know 50 was arbitrary. If you take Beaumont and divide it into 4 quadrants, which it is, and divide 50 into 4, and if you take the downtown core as 1, so make that 1 quadrant, the other 4, which totals 5, divided by 50. I mean, that's just not a lot of signage for, And it certainly helps those who are, who are well known, but it certainly doesn't help those who aren't. So I'm quite concerned that we're tipping the balance here on something that we shouldn't be. So,
Councillor Daniluk?
I'm fine. I will withdraw my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Newkirk, last comment and call the question.
Yeah, all I would say is that, if some councillors thought 50 wasn't sufficient, then I'm all ears to a friendly amendment. So thank you.
All right, seeing no further requests to speak, all those in favor of capping election signs at 50? Okay, that is defeated 4-3. Councillors Munkoff, Swain, Daniluk, and Van Newkirk in favor. Councillor Stout, Barnhart, and Hendricks, and the mayor opposed. That fails. All right, so at this point, we'll take, it's 7:04. We've been sitting for an hour 20. We'll take a quick 5 minutes and then get back to the remainder of the meeting. All right, so we'll call the meeting back to order. Which brings us to item 8C, request for decision, Range Road 243 drainage assessments. Who will speak? Mr. Timothician, whenever you're ready.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me fine?
Yep, we're good.
Perfect. So thank you. I'm here today to provide an update on the Range Road 243 drainage assessment. The original report came to council on August 25th. At that meeting, council directed administration to bring back next steps and costs associated to address the overland drainage concerns to this evening's meeting. Just like to point out a few things during that original meeting on August 25th that was discussed. Well, we looked at items regarding legislation, constraints within the area, how the overland drainage basin worked, regional initiatives, and other information was provided into how that system worked throughout Beaumont related to drainage, and how the LeBlanc Canal and Irvine Creek were key pieces of infrastructure related to those properties. As a result of that report and further assessment, administration was able to determine that there are feasible options to move forward with to potentially address seasonal drainage concerns and flooding that has been brought forward by applicable landowners. As you'll see in options 1 in particular, administration is recommending that there is the potential to do debris removal, minor landscaping work that would fall within the Water Act and applicable legislation that would forego the need for formal approval through Alberta Environment. Details are included within the report. If this work is completed in that manner, work related to that drainage course that was viewed and detailed out on August 25th would be able to take place this year, and cost estimated would be in the realm of $15,000 to complete that work. I'd also just like to point out, just as a general commentary with drainage related to these natural drainage courses, these aren't, while they are protected through Alberta Environment and generally require extensive studies and approvals to do the work, as pointed out just a few minutes ago, we can complete the minor clean out and debris removal within the legislation. These aren't drainage courses that are registered. They're on private property. They cross numerous properties. They aren't maintained by the city of Beaumont at this time, or have they been in the past. So doing any work within those natural drainage courses would potentially set a precedence moving forward in regards to other natural, whether they were naturally existing from the past, man-made created on rural farmland, and potential flooding concerns that could come forward or have come forward in other areas of the municipality. The work that's being proposed does include multiple landowners as stated here, and would require permission to access those lands. Notification has been sent out to those landowners and initial communications have occurred. And so far positive feedback has been obtained in regards to accessing key parcels of land directly west of the landowner that brought forward the concern. I am available to answer further questions in regards to those options presented within the report at this time.
Appreciate your presentation tonight. It's a great body of work with two really good options. Open it up to questions from members of council. Councillor Danlock.
Thank you, Worship. Mr. Timotian, thank you for your presentation. If you may assist me, if you could, attachment number 2, existing drainage area map, the option 1 that is most cost effective, and I think will have a result that we're looking for. Can you kind of explain just from the attachment 2 where this work will actually take place in terms of visually on the map itself? I'm trying to picture where the existing landowners concerned with the RV park is on this map, and where the foliage will be removed, as you suggested, going through various landholders' locations, please. Just a brief description would be helpful. Thank you.
Just for everybody's reference, we're on page 65 of 82 of the package. Mr. Timotian?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. If you look on attachment 2, it doesn't show the drainage course exactly that we were referring to. However, the best reference point would be in the southeast corner of that map. There's it looks like an X in blue. If we go just west to that first property line that runs north-south, that's where there's the drainage course that runs from Highway 625 north. It ends up bending to the west, where you'll see in blue another existing low-lying wet area, and then it continues to the west and heads north into the 80 acres that is currently owned by the City of Beaumont lands that is pointed up on the map, and it intersects that low-lying wet area on the map, and from there continues further north and to the east across 50th Avenue. So the area that we're specifically looking at doing the work, or at least proposing to do the work according to the recommendation, is directly west of the area in blue, that X area, right along that, or west of that property line to the RV park that was being referred to.
Well, you're good. All right, Councillor Munkoff-Swain, followed by Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Mr. Timotian, can you just provide, you mentioned option 2, can you just confirm for me, you say the plan would cost approximately $75,000 to $100,000. Can you just confirm that is just to get the assessment done, and any work on top of that would be additional? Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, Your Worship, through to Councillor Munkoff-Swain. That estimated cost is in relation to do an overall drainage assessment for the entire area, the drainage basin, which would include the Irvine Creek to Wall Canal. That estimate does not include any physical work being completed.
So we would have spent 75 to 100K without achieving anything physically on the ground yet.
Correct.
Okay, follow-up question. I recognize the concern here with this particular landowner. Has administration, and sorry to put you on the spot, but has administration done any assessment of other potential areas that may, or landowners that may come to council with similar concerns, and then all of a sudden, here we go again? I guess the concern is around potential precedent setting for any of these options that we're looking at here.
Yes, Your Worship, through to Councillor Munkoff-Swain. There definitely is that potential concern of other landowners coming forward in the past, and as of recent, post preparing this request for decision, there have been other landowners that have come forward, unlikely tied directly to this report by any means from an information perspective, but just inquiring looking at their land, their drainage patterns, and these natural drainage courses within their property of how those could be mitigated. So if the city were to proceed forward and complete work at our cost to correct these concerns or try to improve these concerns by cleaning these natural pathways out, we could put ourselves in the position to entertain multiple requests. And if you look into the annexed area, these rural pre-development type of properties that are natural, some of them are low lying, have numerous drainage courses that are within them, cutting through them, whether they're protected or not from a right-of-way perspective, such as the LeBlanc Canal or Irvine Creek that we referred to earlier. We definitely could put ourselves in a position that we are facilitating essentially private work on private property. The unique case potentially in this scenario is it does involve multiple landowners, which does make it potentially more difficult for the landowner that brought forward the concern, as they are not in any way in direct control of making improvements to that natural drainage course. So definitely, I think that was part of the request of why it came forward to the city to look at what options were there. However, having said that, it doesn't change the principles that it would be, work completed within those private residences, and the work that can be completed is minimal in nature, going back to the recommendation that we can't disturb the bed of those drainage pathways without those studies that were being referred to in other options.
Follow-up, or you good?
Thank you. Perfect explanation. My concern here is around precedent, but I'll hold my discussion for after.
Councillor Van Newkirk, followed by Councillor Hendricks.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I'll maybe ask the first one and then pause and then come back to the second. It's a comment followed by a question. It seems to me like if council supported the vegetation management option, that we're actually setting up a situation where this is going to become ongoing work, and it's going to be required to be done time after time because the vegetation grows. Doing this is a bunch of physical work. It's physically cutting this material and then physically removing and hauling it out of the ditch for the length of the ditch. So it is quite the physical process. I'm just wondering, there are tools out there that can mow ditches, and there are solutions out there that could mow ditches. So first question, and then a supplemental. Is it intended that this work would be completed by city staff, or should it be approved? Would this be contracted out or asked for contractors to provide solutions to do this work? Question for administration.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Through to Councillor Van Newkirk. The intent of the recommendation was not for city staff to complete this work. It was to be contracted out. The initial clean out at this stage is all that was being proposed. As far as future maintenance or ongoing clean out, that's not what's being proposed at this point in time. What you see a lot of times in these drainage courses, no different than something through the heart of Beaumont, LeBlanc Canal. There does need to be that ongoing maintenance to keep things free flowing, but at the same time, that natural vegetation does serve a purpose for erosion control, cleaning that stormwater as well. So there is a balance there, and we definitely try to have those, much like our storm ponds, those elements, those vegetations there. But at the same time, it does restrict and reduce that flow, and depending on the nature of that drainage course, you can have reoccurrence 3 to 5 years where you have to go in and do, let's call it, more of that major cleaning to remove the majority of that debris, silt, other types of materials that have collected within that drainage course. And then you typically are good for a handful of seasons to move forward. So that's something that we definitely have to be aware of if any work was to be done, and the land remains as is for the coming 5 to 10 years. This could be coming forward again.
Follow-up, yep. Yeah, so I guess where I'm going with this is that should this vegetation removal move ahead tonight, we are setting a precedent in that regard around taking ownership of cleaning out that ditch on an ongoing basis. So, by doing it once, we're inherently committing to doing it into the future for as long as that ditch exists. That's how I would see it if I was the landowner. So, my concern is how often and how many times and who's going to decide that as we move forward. There are, I'm not here to debate how we would physically remove that vegetation, but what I would say is we are, by making this decision now, opening up the conversation around Beaumont being responsible to do that, and how often would we do it. Grass grows, reeds grow. When you cut things and clean them up, they actually grow faster in some regards. So I'll leave my comments at that and maybe step back in.
Councillor Hendricks.
Your worship, we of course have, shall we say, ended up with this situation as a result of an annexation. So it's kind of a one-off. The drainage course issue has been a topic that was reviewed and extensively by the previous council, and a report was completed, and actions were expected. There was to be some work done. Nothing was going to be status quo as a result. As we continue to hard surface all our various areas, and drainage becomes the only way to relieve these areas that don't have stormwater management particularly attached to them, then this is the net outcome. We heard the arguments about why there's an elevated volume of water in that space, and that's the argument is that the property owner to the south of 625 has filled an old pond, and as a result, there's no storage capacity at that side. And as a result, the culvert gets overwhelmed as it crosses 625. And as a result, you've got a volume issue traveling not only north, but also west. And as a result, we have a ditch that didn't start living its current municipal life in its current condition. It has grown in over time though, and it needs some debris removal for a cost of $15,000. You also have an individual who, under Leduc County's rules, got a development permit and should have the right to enjoy that property without fear of flooding each and every year, because it's, quote, a natural drainage course. It's a natural drainage course when the volume is reduced to where it is today. And that's what's creating the flood. That's what's creating the push. So I'm not concerned about setting a precedent. In fact, if there's more people with this same issue, I'll bring them forward. This problem needs to be dealt with. We're here to deal with problems with our citizens, not to duck them. So be happy to assist here at this time. So whenever you're ready for the recommendation, I'd be happy to make that motion.
Thank you. I will call on you when we're ready. Councillor Van Newkirk, you had a second.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue to my second is I wonder if we've provided what the actual solution would be here. Having been to the site and looked at things with council, I think I agree with Councillor Hendricks wholeheartedly that we need to deal with these issues. And for me, it feels like the vegetation issue is just a part of the solution, and I don't know that it's the whole solution. So the precedent set would be that we continue to remove the vegetation, and if that is the air quote solution that we're willing to provide for the landowner to enjoy their property, then I think that that's the precedent we're setting in that regard. The longer term solution to this would be what a decision about, or a discussion about, or an analysis of what features on that property are actually naturally occurring, and those that have been crafted over time, or ditches that have been dug over time. Just because there's reeds in it now doesn't mean it was historically there, right? So, I know that's where the bigger study comes into effect. So, for myself, I support the vegetation removal now. What I'm questioning is that if that is the actual real solution to this problem. I don't know that it is. So for tonight, for myself, I'm very happy to support the vegetation removal option, but I fear that we haven't provided a final solution for the landowner to do that. And for myself, I feel that when we make this decision tonight, that is a commitment that we're going to be helping them out moving forward with the same regard. But I fear, if and when the vegetation removal isn't enough, the discussion will still come back to us. So those are my comments. I'm happy to support the $15,000 option tonight on vegetation removal. Thank you.
Fair enough. Councillor Hendricks, you prepared to make that motion tonight?
Yes, I do. I move that council direct administration to proceed with option 1, debris removal, the cost of $15,000.
Thank you very much. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Monkhouse-Swain.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll keep my video off just because the bandwidth here isn't great. So apologies for that. So again, my question goes back to Councillor Van Nieuwkerk's point, and I'm certainly no expert in this, but are we solving the problem for this year, which great, or is this something that's going to come back to us, every year? Is this every 5 years? That's what I'm concerned about here. I certainly want to make sure that we can provide every option for the landowner to use their property, but I'm trying to get a better sense of what this could potentially do for our city going forward, not just with this location, but others. So do we have any sense of cleaning it up once, how much value, for lack of a better term, that gives us?
Yes, Your Worship, through to Councillor Monkhouse-Swain. The way I put that into perspective would be when we did some extensive clean out within the LeBlanc Canal, that was completed back probably close to 7 years ago, and the second phase occurred probably a year after that. So since that time, while there's been some ongoing maintenance, and definitely that's a much different drainage course than what we're referring to here, either way, that clean out and that work that was completed did serve for at minimum 3 to 5 years in a significant way. Whether that or not that'll be the case in this situation would be something that would have to be determined. But I would suggest that any clean out that's done is definitely going to improve what the existing capacity is intended to be, the rate of flow, etc. That wouldn't compromise any other adjacent properties, because no physical changes are being made to that drainage course, which is important in this regard, as pointed out in that option. So I believe it would give an opportunity to demonstrate how that drainage course can function in its optimum state as it sits now, to monitor the results in the springtime if the work was to go forward, and determine how those seasonal conditions are working and how those property owners are affected. We know there's going to be water within the area. We know undeveloped areas do have those type of occurrences within those times and until they are developed. But to see if they're working still efficiently in that natural state and that the properties are ultimately protected would be key here. And then information could be obtained and monitored to determine what next steps, if any, are required.
Yeah, thank you. I think that answers that question perfectly for me. I think what we will get out of this is some good data, and we'll see and it'll give us a bit of time as well to look back on it. So I like option 1 here. The landowner clearly has major concerns here, and we need to make sure that we can ensure that within our bounds that we make sure that they can run their business. My final question would be: have we checked back in with the landowner and the thought and feedback on these options? This was initially presented to us from our landowner concern. So I'm just curious if what we're looking at approving here, if we've run those options by the landowner, if that's satisfactory, etc. So I'm just curious on feedback from the landowner.
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Monkoff-Swain. We haven't had any direct contact back with the original landowner that brought forward these concerns. However, at this point, if council chooses to move forward with option one, there definitely be information provided that we are going to be completing that work for a couple of reasons, as that courtesy based on that original issue being brought forward, and two, that the work would be taking place adjacent to that individual's property. As far as feedback goes, based on conversations with that landowner going back over the summer months, the discussions that took place on site, that feedback was collected, that was utilized to further investigate potential options, which ultimately option one seemed to make the most sense with what we had to work with, the legislation that's applicable, and would go to serve that landowner's feedback and concerns to help improve the situation around their property.
Yeah, I would agree based on my discussions at that time with the landowner that this would certainly at least give a bit of relief for this year or the spring, and not have to worry about that. So, I fully support this option in front of us, and thanks for doing all the work in the background. Appreciate it.
Councillor Danlock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I also do support the motion as well too. I do believe it's going to give us some relief to the landowner and do a proper job of looking after our citizens. One thing about annexation is that sometimes you annex land as a municipality, you may inherit problems from previous situations. It's like buying a house. You hope the foundation is proper in the inspection, but the inspection turns out to be wrong. You bought it, it's yours. I can't speak to the suggestion that the landowner south of 625 filled in a water pond has caused drainage problems as land spilled over into our area now, but part of our job is look after our citizens and their problems as best we can. So annexation sometimes can have issues with the baggage, if you want to call it that, but I do think we're going on the right course here. I am concerned about setting a precedent, but I do believe this situation is rather unique, being part of the annex land situation, so I'm prepared to support the motion going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no more further requests to speak, call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. So option one, clear the debris, is passed. I do agree with Councillor Van Newkirk, though, that I don't think this may not necessarily be the end answer, which brings us to recommendation number 2, the comprehensive watershed plan and survey. I'd like to move that we bring this one back to budget, as it's a fairly large ask and should be seen in the totality of our whole budget as we move forward into the future. So discussion on the motion to bring part 2 back to budget. Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. It's always great when we can come up with a solution to help one of our residents. Which brings us to item 8D, Beaumont Sport and Recreation Center noise abatement update. Mr. Frankton.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. Tonight we are discussing the cooling tower that is at the Beaumont Sport and Rec Center. We have had 3 complaints from residents on 63rd Street, which is directly east of the Beaumont Sport and Recreation Center. And this occurred during the commissioning and testing of the cooling tower and ice plant around July 20th. We went through Clark Builders and the mechanical sub on the project to discuss options around dampening of the sound, what has worked in other municipal settings where there is residential properties around the area. We did get some third-party testing done just so we could get a good baseline. And our baseline was actually lower than the breakdown of the sound data provided from the original cut sheet. So the decibels right under the cooling tower were 81.7 decibels. And that's on the attachment 71 of page 82. And then the following few pages, you do see the locations within the area backing onto 63rd, where we took additional tests just to get the correct decibel reading. If we do go back to the digital edge cut sheet, it has those areas backing the residential backing on around that 65, in between 60, 65, which is, you know, in comparative terms, conversational speech and piano practice is the example that's given on the sheet from the third-party vendor. So then we did receive 4 options, that being a low sound fan, a whisper quiet fan with intake silencer, and a whisper quiet fan with intake and discharge silencer, varying in price point from 20,000 to 125,000. Each option would increase the sound dampening, with option 4 being the most effective from all sides. Something to keep in mind is decibel scale on the cut sheets is logarithm. It all coincides back through, but you can see each is weighted rating over goes down each option. The challenge is that the noise created by the operation of the cooling tower is a new sound to the area, and sound is both a decibel reading and perception. In the Beaumont Noise Abatement Bylaw, noise is defined as a sound in which annoys or disturbs humans, or which endangers or injures the safety or health of humans. It is also determined by a peace officer, and it could constitute an offense under the bylaw. There's no identifiable decibel level threshold in the bylaw. So we have brought 4 options to discuss with council tonight. And then just knowing kind of where that baseline is with that third-party report to how we want to move forward with the residents' complaints. We have been providing updates to the residents, letting them know that the information was coming to the committee tonight for discussion. From a budgetary standpoint, the potential solutions identified are all unfunded in the 2020 budget. And if council directed, administration would proceed with one of the solutions in the 2020 as a specific funding source would need to be identified before moving forward.
Is that the completion of your presentation?
Yes.
Okay. All right, moving forward to opening up to questions from members of council. Councillor Hendricks.
Your worship, thank you. And I participated on some decks, or a deck, I guess, with some neighbors that asked me to attend behind the pathway when July date was issued for the startup of this unit. Certainly no sound ratings, no decimal gun, but certainly could hear what the complaint was. But my comment or question is more along the lines of the sound shadow that comes with this unit. And not sure who our friends at Digital Media, Edge Media are, if they've got that capability. But in my line of work, I've been given the task of creating sound shadows, depending on where our building is going compared to where a highway may be, or where a industrial complex may be. And what it does is it tells you where the sound shadow goes and at what elevation it travels and what you need to offset that, either berms or trees or as you say, baffling of sound within the unit itself. So I think there's a problem. I think it needs to get resolved. The sound shadows study, which is, it's not a huge onerous step to obtain that, would give you more of a data type answer to your question as compared to somebody standing underneath the unit getting decibel readings. It's the shadow that causes the grief. So I look forward to having this back at a budget discussion, and that we could have a comprehensive discussion that surrounds perhaps
a comment from Digital on whether or not they can create that sound shadow for us. It's not a very expensive item. It's not a huge undertaking, and that they can then give us a better grounding of what should be done here to just alleviate the summertime package that seems to be causing those people the most grief.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Danlock, followed by Councillor Van Newkirk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, if I could. On the report, on the options 1 to 4, did I miss somewhere on here where the price point is for each option on each handout? I looked at it a couple of times. I must be having a bad day. I don't see, if it is, I can't seem to see a price on option 1, 2, 3, and 4 to give us the range that was outlined in the report earlier, please.
Yeah, Your Worship, back to council. In the report, it is not identified. I'd have to pull up the file with each individual itemized options and their related price points.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chairman, so on that, I know we had the report from the provider in terms of the decimal levels for various points of conversation, so it was very helpful to get an idea how loud things can be. We're at 81.7 decibels under the tower right now. So option 1, if I read this correctly, if we were to go with option 1 at budget time, if that's going to be the low end, the 25,000 option, I'm assuming it must be the low end.
Correct.
At option 1, that would lower the decibels down to 70 from 50 feet away. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that how you that?
From the
Sound?
top of the unit.
Top of the unit. Okay, so the bottom unit would be 61 and so on. Okay, thank you. That helps me explain the 4 options. Thank you. A secondary question, if I may, regarding sound deadening. Is there any point in discussing possibly along the diagram of points B and C along the walking path near the people's homes itself, could we not look at doing a wall of trees to possibly help sound abatement as well? I know sometimes trees are used for just blockage. Sometimes trees are used to deaden sound as well. In some subdivisions, could doing some trees along here as well help mitigate some of the sound? Is that something we had possibly considered or would consider as part of the solution?
Yes, through Your Worship to council. We did take the readings in various areas on that path. Some of the areas were higher treed areas than the other. And we did notice that the decibel readings were very similar, whether it had that full coverage or if it was wide open.
Thank you.
Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, thank you. Myself, I've been out there too, kind of in a later evening to try and understand where the complaints are coming from. And I can definitely see where they're coming from. And I also recognize that it is a new sound to the area. So I'm happy to hear that Councillor Hendricks was suggesting that we bring this forward to budget deliberations. That's what I was going to suggest tonight, was to bring that forward. As Mr. Franklin had suggested, we don't have prices on options 2 or 3 anyways tonight. So I don't think we were armed to make that decision whether or not we were going with option 1, 2, 3, or 4 tonight. And I believe this one was just being presented as information, was it? Perhaps I'm incorrect on that, but anyways, I don't think we're armed with the information we need to make a decision on this tonight. So those are my comments right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question for Councillor Hendricks. This study that you're talking of, the sound channel study, would that either be able to help us inform budget discussions when we're talking about what should be done?
So what it does is it takes the impact of the sound and it decides, what direction it's following, and it also tells you in terms of distance when that sound will mitigate itself. So and then it'll tell you what you need to offset that. And if you have to really offset it, you might need to build a wall in front of this unit, which then creates a barrier between themselves and this cooling tower, right? So it just gives you what it takes physically based on the sound shadow study, and it's a well-recognized tool for that sort of thing. I've had many experiences with them, including building a seniors lodge next to the Crowtride pro-child trail in Calgary.
Mhm.
The city of Calgary would not allow us to build without the sound shadow study. And so, and away we go.
Yeah, because here's the page I'm on right now. I'm thinking that probably the motion tonight is to get an estimate on that study, then bring it and all the options back to budget, and then we can see what we can do from there. I mean, we got till summertime before the residents will be using their decks again, so it's not like we have to do this immediately, but we do have to get this solved somehow, and I think that study is going to be a key piece. So prepared to make the motion to bring that study and the options back to budget?
Yeah, I think, yes, I will be happy to do that. And I think if we talk to digital media, that might be an arsenal anyway. And
Okay.
say, listen, you've got these facts so far. Could you build this shadow study for us? Bring it back. Right? So,
Okay, so moved. Councillor Stout, comments?
Thank you. Yes. I want to put the light on that. We didn't have a motion on the table. But
You do now.
all I was going to say was I'm actually just a little dismayed that given that this is marquee building, big tourist attraction in Beaumont, major effort by council and administration to bring us here, get us to this point. And it's like I say, a marquee building, a keynote building that I'm hoping will be, the place in Beaumont for the next 25 years plus. I would kind of expected that we would have put the quietest solution that we could reasonably expect in the budget for this item. So my immediate thought looking at these options is that, I picked the quietest one. I recognize that's not what we're here to do tonight. We're just to look at the options, but and to consider that at budget time if that's where we're going to go. But that's definitely, I'll tip my hand straight away. That's definitely where I'm aiming, and I'm going to take some persuading that any other solution is preferable, assuming that we can't mitigate most of the sound through other measures, which may or may not be cheaper. In reference to the decibel logarithmic scale, one thing I want to stress to everybody that I know some of these reductions in sound don't look like very much on a decibel scale because, as was alluded to earlier, it's a logarithmic scale, which means that, and it's a logarithm on base 10, which means that an increase in 10 decibels is a doubling in the perceived loudness, and an increase in 20 decibels is then a quadrupling of the perceived loudness. So dropping it from, let's say, 80 to 60 means it's a quarter of the perceived loudness, which makes a big difference. I mean, it makes the difference between a vacuum cleaner and conversational speech. And that's important, I think, to bear in mind, because that's what we're looking at here. And I think we need to get somewhere into the conversational speech level.
Yeah, agree with you, Councillor, and that's what that study is designed to bring back, is to tell us what we need to do to get there. So,
yep,
glad to hear you're in favor.
I'd certainly support that, the motion that's now been put forward to do that. Thank you.
All those see no further requests to speak. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Which brings us to the end of our active agenda items tonight, or sorry, business items tonight. Item 9, no bylaws. We have no bylaws. Councillor inquiries and reports. Is there any member of council wishing to ask administration a question this evening? Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I just wanted to say good job to administration for getting the Beaumont Sports and Rec Center online and dealing with questions and concerns in a timely manner. And I can say that because I've been spending hours and hours there myself with the kids and being around. And I think it's a pretty good feather in our cap. When we do have items to sort out, I think we see them, barring this issue we just talked about, I think we see them as wrinkles rather than big problems. So that's great. One of the things I just wanted to make a comment to administration on to consider with BSRC is that on professional development days associated with the schools. It might be helpful when to anticipate those and perhaps provide some extra programming for the kids on those days. One of the things, it was a comment that was suggested to me by a couple of parents while we were hanging out at the climbing wall, watching the kids do their climbing there. So just a suggestion. I guess that has been done in some other municipalities they were aware of. I don't have awareness of this, so that's why I thought I'd bring it tonight. We know when the PD days are, and that might allow us to think of some fun things to do and advertise to families in the community. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there members of council that need to ask some questions of administration this evening? No. Is there a member of council wishing to make a statement tonight? No. Okay, I got a couple of updates. It's been an actual interesting couple of weeks at the EMRB. We had our first meeting under Mayor Choi as the new chair of the EMRB. It was a fantastic meeting. It went really well. At that meeting, vice chair was elected, and that was Mayor Alana Natu from Sturgeon County. So my congratulations go out to her. I think it's a good balance between the urbans and the rurals, which will help bring some balance back to the board. A couple of interesting projects that are about to head out to municipalities for some consultation. One is the broadband, and this is a file that Beaumont is well out in front of. But we finished the broadband study, and it basically came to the conclusion that strong broadband is going to be a major economic driver in this region. And so it's nice to see that Beaumont's taking the lead, and we have a lot of strong things to offer on this file, but the next steps are being determined. And so some of that will be coming back for your looking for opinions on what are the next steps for ourselves as a region. The next project that's coming forward that our residents will be involved in is the Regional Agriculture Master Plan, which Councillor Barnhart sits on, is coming back for engagement. They have some policies in place that they want to run by the residents of the region, from the cities, from the rurals, and get the feedback back on value-added ag and transportation and all those things. So those are a couple of updates from me going forward. Hope to continue to keep giving you guys updates. Do you have any questions for me this evening? Seeing none. CAO's update.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship, and the rest of council. I got a few items. I'll be very quick. We issued an updated issues briefing to council this afternoon, a little after 1600 hours regarding our COVID cases, and we're pleased to announce that Beaumont is now off of the watch list. We had 5 more cases recover, which brings us below 10. So we now have 9 active cases. If we hit 10, that's the watch. Again, if you recall, we had this discussion that we believe there are some clusters in there. So we fully expect, if we can make it through the next day or two, to see a significant drop in those numbers as well. The AHS map, for anybody who's looking at that, will not change color, however, because as was decided last week, we are part of the AHS Edmonton region, so that map will remain purple. The cases for the last 3 days, October 9th, 236, the 10th, 246, and the 11th, 220, with 13 people in the ICU. So those numbers are significant. Testing is significant. There are measures put in our region. While voluntary, we all need to do our part. Tax recovery, back on September 22nd, we reported that there was 22 properties that were entering the tax recovery process. We're pleased to note that 8 of those, almost half of them, have been removed from that process, so that the bills have been paid. As we talked about on September 22nd, that to our knowledge, we have not ever taken a property to the auction, and we're hoping very much hoping that by December 11th, that'll be the case as well. It's quite labor intensive. The tax team is chasing people around on a quite regular basis to get these bills paid, but it's the right thing to do, and they do a good job of it. On October 11th, the Beaumont Fire Services responded to a report of a structure fire. They were able to get quick entry and extinguish a fire that was essentially, it was located in the laundry room, and they were able to keep it in that laundry room. There were 3 occupants in the home. Nobody was hurt. Damage was pretty much smoke staining. The fire crews did an amazing job on this call to limit that damage. So congratulations and thank you to that group. We have been informed by the Minister of Children's Services, Minister Schultz, that she would like to tour our early learning childcare center on or about October 26th with MLA Rutherford. They'll be accompanying the minister. An invitation will be extended to council and to the mayor. Once we get more information, we'll send that out to you, and Shima will coordinate that. And my last item is this lady to my left is her last council meeting for, I'm thinking, what, a couple weeks? Kendra is finished on Friday, and she's due to have a baby shortly after that. So we wish her the best of luck. Well, I didn't want people to think we fired you.
It's true, and I appreciate that.
Good.
It'd be nice to have a little more than 3 weeks off.
Oh, okay.
2020.
4 weeks then. Yeah. Now we wish her the best of luck. Definitely a huge contributor to our team. And Ms. Darje is going to be backfilling for Kendra, and Tika is going to be backfilling for Ms. Darje. So let's get some people into different roles. So that's always exciting as well. And that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Once again, Ms. Raymond, our best wishes. Okay, so we have no correspondence items. Are there any notice of motions this evening? Okay, seeing none, there are no items in closed session, and therefore, once again, thank you all very much.